Sometimes the biggest mysteries aren't found in abandoned places or cryptic notes. They're hidden in plain sight, wrapped in the routines of daily life. For Jake Miller, a 23-year-old college dropout working as a delivery driver, life was as mundane as it could get. Or so he thought. It was an ordinary Monday morning. Jake, sipping cheap coffee from a gas station, drove his delivery van through Oak Ridge, a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened. He'd been delivering here for months, but something about today felt off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the air felt heavier, the silence louder. His next stop was 125 Pine Street, an address he'd delivered to dozens of times. The house was run down with peeling paint and a yard overgrown with weeds. It belonged to Mr. Grayson, an elderly man who always collected his packages with a warm smile. But today, the house seemed different. Curtains that were always open were now drawn shut, and Mr. Grayson, who usually greeted Jake at the door, didn't appear. Jake left the package on the porch, but as he turned to leave, he noticed something strange. The faint smell of smoke. It wasn't wood smoke or cigarettes. It was chemical, sharp, and out of place. He hesitated, then knocked on the door. No answer. Against his better judgment, he peeked through the mail slot. The living room was dark, but he could see faint shadows moving inside. Was someone there? At lunch, Jake couldn't shake the unease. He mentioned it to his coworker, Mia, who joked that he was overthinking. "It's just an old man who likes his privacy," she said. But Jake wasn't convinced. Something about the shadows felt wrong. That evening, he drove back to Pine Street, unable to let it go. As Jake parked a block away, he noticed an older woman across the street, standing by her mailbox. He approached her, introduced himself, and asked about Mr. Grayson. The woman, Mrs. Harding, frowned. "I haven't seen him in days," she said. "That's not like him. He always walks his dog in the mornings." Jake glanced at the house, his gut telling him something was very wrong. Jake and Mrs. Harding decided to call the police for a welfare check. An officer arrived within minutes and knocked on the door. Still no answer. Eventually, the officer forced the door open. What they found was chilling. Mr. Grayson, unconscious in his armchair, and the faint hiss of a gas leak from the kitchen. The shadows Jake had seen weren't from another person, but from a swinging ceiling fan reflecting the flickering light of a malfunctioning stove. But here's where it gets strange. As paramedics treated Mr. Grayson, the officer discovered something else. A locked basement door. Inside the basement, they found an illegal setup for manufacturing counterfeit money. Mr. Grayson wasn't just a kind old man. He'd been forced into working for a local crime ring, using his house as a front. The gas leak wasn't an accident. It was a setup by the criminals to silence him after he'd threatened to report them. Thanks to Jake's persistence, Mr. Grayson survived and was able to help the police dismantle the operation. The neighborhood returned to its quiet routine, but Jake couldn't shake the lesson he'd learned. Trust your instincts. Sometimes the smallest details, like a strange smell or drawn curtains, can lead to uncovering the biggest truths. For Jake, it was just another delivery. But in those quiet streets where nothing ever seemed to happen, he proved that even the most ordinary lives can hide extraordinary mysteries. The question is, would you have noticed the smell of smoke?